Hello and welcome to Applicata Biblia. My name is Mark. Thank you so much for stopping by. This is going to be the last recording in this spot for for a while. I may come back here. I typically record 3 or 4 of these at a time, and I happen to have free reign of the house today, so this is where I'm doing it from. So we are continuing in the series, A Walk in the Bible, where we look at Bible characters so we can understand how God is dealing with his people. We are in the time of the Kings. It's book 3. We are in lesson 39, and we're going to look at Solomon in 1 Kings chapter 3. 1 Kings chapter 3. So we're basically done with the book of Samuel, which includes the life of Saul and David, the first 2 kings. And we're going to get into Solomon. Now, he's the 3rd king. He will be the last king of the United Kingdom of Israel. Now, a lot of things happen before he becomes king. There's a lot of intrigue and things that happen, but he does become king. And what we're going to look at today is the beginning of that kingdom under him. But it's important to know how important Solomon is to the future of the culture of Israel. Solomon is very wise. He becomes so wise. It's amazing to everybody. I'll just say that. And he ends up understanding he understands God so well, and he understands and loves nature. He's a naturalist. He observes how things work, and he starts writing about those kinds of things. He writes some of the Psalms. He writes many Psalms, but not all of them were written down for today. He writes some of the Proverbs, because he's wise. So it would make sense, right, that he would espouse proverbs and different sayings that would make people think about God and our position before God. He writes Ecclesiastes, which is basically a preacher preaching about things. So these are all the books that are either attributed to him or parts of the books are attributed to him. He also writes what is known as the Song of Solomon, which is a very interesting read. When you look at it, the differences between men and women and a man who is romantically in love and that sort of thing. So the problem that Solomon has, even though he has all this great wisdom and he really understands God so well, is that he is expanding the empire of Israel. And it becomes its greatest under his reign. It's still united. It's still united. All of the tribes are still very much united. And he becomes a force to be reckoned with. And he makes alliances everywhere with everybody. And he does it through marriages. He has 300 wives and 700 concubines. So he's got these 1,000 wives, and they end up being his downfall, unfortunately. In order to please them and his alliance that he has through these wives, he erects these places of idol worship. And that is his only issue. And that is a gigantic issue because we'll see that God understands that, we're going to sin. He understands that we're weak as humans. I mean, he made us after all. And he knows that we're weak a lot of times. And it's a lot of things he'll forgive as long as we keep going back to him and looking for that forgiveness and repenting. But when it comes to idolatry, there's not a lot he can do. And this becomes a big problem for Israel later, especially. So it's just important to understand how big and how great after this reading that Israel becomes. They live in a peaceful time, okay? They're not like warring with everybody. These are peaceful times. And David really helped that begin in the beginning. Solomon does build the temple, builds this great temple. He builds himself a great house, right? Okay. And we see that David had a lot to do with that. We see that Hiram really helps him a lot from the northern part of the kingdom. And it's because of his great respect for David that he helps. So all of these things have happened, and we're not going to get into all of that. Again, I would suggest you read through that to see how that works. Now, this coincides with the Chronicles as well. So the Chronicles talks about a lot of these things that happen as well. Chronicles aren't quite as extensive. You don't see the Israelite kings so much in the Chronicles because the Israel kings are evil after the split. But right now, they're united. So we're going to read from 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 1 and 2. Solomon made an alliance by marriage with Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And he took Pharaoh's daughter and brought her into the city of David until he finished building his own house and the house of Jehovah and the wall of Jerusalem all around. So he's fortifying all these cities. Only the people were sacrificing in high places, for a house for the name of Jehovah had not been built until those days. So was it okay for Solomon to marry the Egyptian woman? I think if he married her and he didn't let her influence on him damage his relationship with God, I would say it would have been okay. But one of the things God says, especially like in Deuteronomy, he says, don't go back to Egypt. Don't go back there for help. And I don't think he's doing that. I think he's just trying to make an alliance and have a peaceful kingdom. But because of the influence on him, it's not a good idea. Okay, Solomon loved Jehovah, verse 3, to walk in the statutes of his father David. That's a good thing. Only he was sacrificing in the places and burning in the high places and burning incense. Issues. That's always an issue. And the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for it was the great high place. Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. Jehovah appeared to Solomon in Gibeon in a dream of the night, and God said, "Ask, what shall I give to you?" And Solomon said, "You have done great kindness to your servant, my father David, as he walked before you in truth and in righteousness and in uprightness of heart with you. And you have kept for him this great kindness and have given to him a son sitting on his throne as today," which is him. "And now, O Jehovah, my God, you have caused your servant to reign instead of my father David. And I am a little man-child. I do not know how to go out and come in. And your servant is in the midst of your people whom you have chosen, a numerous people that cannot be numbered or counted for multitude. Also, give to your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, to discern between good and evil, for who is able to judge this, your great people?" So this is a very pivotal point, right? God says, "What do you want?" And he asks for wisdom. Was it okay for Solomon to sacrifice in the high places? No, it really wasn't. The sacrifices were supposed to happen. It's still going on at the tabernacle. That's where it was supposed to happen. But God visits him anyway. Obviously, God, turned aside to this, even though it wasn't sanctioned. And he's visiting Solomon here anyway. This is a merciful God. He's allowing anything that isn't completely right, and he's going, okay, he's worshiping me. So, okay, I'm going to visit him. How does Solomon act and feel toward God? How does he feel and act? Well, he loves God. He loves what he's done for David. He knows that he's been with David. He gives him the credit. And he says, you've done all these great things. And you have made me king. So he's very much aware of the power of God, and everything that has happened is because of God. Why does Solomon ask for understanding? He sees what a big nation this is. David was a great king. He had all these people following him. And he's just saying, give me some understanding so these people will follow what I ask of them. And of course, I've asked, what would you ask for? And I don't know if that would have been what I would ask for. I don't know. I just would have been, I don't know. If I was that a young man still, and young people don't usually ask for the good things like this. Verse 10, and the word was good in the eyes of the Lord that Solomon had asked this thing. And God said to him, because you have asked this thing, you have not asked for yourself many days or riches, or that you have the life of your enemies, and have asked for discernment for yourself to understand judgment. Behold, I have done according to your words. Behold, I have given you a wise and understanding heart, so that there was none like you before you, and after you none shall rise up like you. And also I have given you that which you have not asked, both riches and honor, that there shall not be a man like you among the kings all your days. And if you walk in my ways to keep my statutes and my commandments as your father David walked, then I will prolong your days. So that all of these things come to pass. Solomon is so smart about things and so wise that there's a story about the Queen of Sheba coming to visit him just to see just how wise this is. And Sheba is way down there in Africa. She comes up to visit him because his knowledge just becomes so well known among all the other nations. So what did God think of Solomon's request? Well, he's happy that, okay, there's a lot of things you could have asked for that would have been really immature, but you have some maturity here, and so he grants him. What were the conditions that God grants him this wisdom? Well, you have to walk in my statutes. And this is something that never, ever changes. I get it. We're under a different covenant. But God expects us to walk in his statutes as Christians. He hasn't changed. God hasn't changed, okay? The covenant has changed, but God hasn't changed. He expects us to act accordingly. We are to be people of God and reveal our godliness as much as we can in front of other people. We're not to go around being liars and cheaters and that sort of thing. God hasn't changed any. Verse 15, Solomon awoke, and behold, it was a dream. And he came to Jerusalem and stood before the ark of the covenant of Jehovah, and offered burnt offerings, and made peace offerings, and made a banquet for all of his servants. Then two women, harlots, came in to the king and stood before him. And the one woman said, "O my lord, this woman and I were living in one house, and I gave birth with her in the house. And it happened on the third day I gave birth, this woman also gave birth. And we were together. No stranger was with us in the house. Only we two in the house. And the son of this woman died at night because she laid on it. And she rose up in the middle of the night and took my son from beside me and laid it in her bosom. And your handmaid was asleep. And she laid her dead son on my bosom. And I rose up in the morning to suckle my son, and behold, it was dead. And I looked at it in the morning, and behold, it was not my son whom I had born. And the other woman said, "No, but my son is the living, and your son the dead." And this one said, "No, but your son is dead, and my son the living." And they spoke before the king. The king is holding court for two harlots. What does this say about the king and his kingship, Solomon's kingship? And what is the dispute? Well, pretty easy, right? These two, this baby, these two women have have a baby, each have a baby, and one of them is dead, and they're each saying, well, that one is saying she switched it out, and the other one is saying, no, I didn't. So that's the dispute. But the fact that the king is allowing these women of ill repute to come to him, he's judging people. He's being a king, right? He's opening his court to everybody. Everybody in his kingdom can come to him. 23 through 28. And the king said, this one says, this is my son, the living one, and your son, the dead. And that one says, no, your son is dead, and my son is the living. And the king said, bring a sword to me. And they brought the sword before the king. And the king said, divide the living child in two, and give the half to the one and the half to the other. And the woman whose son it was, the living one, said to the king, for her womb yearned over her son. Yea, she said, O my lord, give her the living child, and do not at all put it to death. And this one said, let it be neither yours or mine, divide it. And the king answered and said, give it to her, the living child, and do not put it to death at all. She is its mother. And all Israel heard of the judgment that the king had judged, and feared from the face of the king, for they saw that the wisdom of God was in him to do judgment. Wow. So later in Solomon's life, his many wives and idolatry got him into trouble. Through God's word, we too gain much understanding. Give some examples on how we can avoid getting into trouble with God by using the understanding that he gives us. Well, before we get to that, this is an amazing story that he would go out on this limb, understanding that the mother would in no way want her child to die. She would rather give it up than let it die. And he understood the love of a mother. And this, obviously, this thing went out to abroad to many, many people. And many people understood his wisdom and how smart he was, how he could look at nature and understand nature, and how he looked at life and saw the futility in life, and that understanding God was better than all the futility in life. And he wrote songs to God. He wrote these proverbs of wisdom to people. And his great knowledge went out among all the people. Like I said, that even Sheba would come and visit him to see and witness this great wisdom. But even though he had this great wisdom, he marries all these wives, and all of this, even in the midst of all this wisdom, his standing before God, he let slip away to a certain degree by doing these things, by allowing this idolatry in his land. And the question is, even though God gives us great wisdom through Jesus, how can we even allow our great wisdom of Jesus being the Christ and our access to God, let it slip away? Well, it's the same thing. We can let ourselves get into trouble through sin. And as much as people say, there's the doctrine of you can't fall away. Well, we can very easily fall away. Because once you know the Christ and how it should lead us back into a right relationship before God by us fostering our spiritual side of life, we can let this life take that away from us. It's very easily done in this world. A lot of people may not believe in Satan. Some people may think that Satan is just a euphemism or something, or a metaphor or something. Whatever you think about it, the things that he puts in front of us every day to divert us away from God is there. And as I said earlier, God says himself that those things are idolatry. Okay. Thank you so much for listening. And again, it is Jesus that draws us away from that life into the life that God wants us to have. Thank you so much for stopping by. and we'll see you in the next one.